had an interesting question that was asked of me, which was concatenation. So the concept being, if I take this concatenation, yes, the concept being, if you watch the parade scope, come on, work with me. I don't know why it's acting a little funky. Concept being, if you watch the parade scope, now I've just blown all this detail out. What happens to that detail further down the pipeline? So if I come here into this next node, can I retrieve that data? And the answer is yes. So it's not being clipped out. I will tell you that it is possible to push it so far that it will eventually clip out. And the other way of dealing with that, let's undo. We have undos, by the way, multiple undos. In fact, very cool, I can come here and there's a couple in the view. Is it the view? Original memory and preview memory. If I come into a shot, I come into the shot, it's already partially graded. I can add a node here, and I can do something here. Let's push it some way. And I decide I really hate what I've just done. If I want to go back to what it was originally when I first landed on this shot, I can come up to here and go back to original memory, and it just did it. So it remembered the state when I entered that shot, and that's one of my possible options instead of doing undo. For instance, if I had done it in here and I had done a whole bunch of corrections in here, which I'm suddenly not seeing. Some funkiness going on in here. Oh, there we go. So if I had done a whole bunch of corrections in here, and I'm not really sure exactly where I was, I'm not quite sure, the tweaks I had done to get me here in order to undo them. I'm not sure how many steps I need to go back to undo before I undo too much. This is where this comes in really, really handy, is the original memory. So not only do you have a bunch of undos, you've got this type of stuff where it's kind of stateful. The other thing I can do is if we're a couple shots down the road here, and I decide that I want to bring in back this sky in, one of the things I can do is come up here and add a parallel node. So what just happened? What did I just do? So I added a couple nodes here by adding a parallel node. If I set it up this way, you'll get a better look at it. The parallel node is a special node. This is the parallel node right here, this little guy right here. If I double click him, I can't actually do anything on him. He does nothing except combine two other nodes. So what I can do is, this is my primary, my primary correction here. This is my parallel correction here. I could come up to here and let's say pull up the curves, pull up my qualifier, and I can qualify the sky here. And I can pull up, is it toggle? I'm so used to it with the control surface. View, highlight, Command H, Shift H. All right, so this is the selection I just pulled. So Shift H here shows me the key that I'm pulling. All right, and I've got these HSL controls, hue, saturation, luminance, a combination of which now are pulling that key that you're seeing there. Let's say I just want to pull a luminance key. I can turn these off, or I can just jump into this little luminance subtab that automatically has these deselected. Right? But I've done that, and now I can adjust. I'll do it from the control surface, HSL qualifier, and I want to adjust my luminance channel. So you can see I got softness controls here, and I've got my low clip, and I'm going to bring up my high clip because it's the highlights I'm really interested in. I'm going to get rid of my highlight softness, and it's the sky I'm interested in. All right, so I'm kind of pulling that sky. I'm not real happy with that selection. So the other thing I can do is I can isolate it with a window. So let's go into my curve here. I'll turn that on. And I can add some points. So what I really want to do is kind of isolate this to the sky. Close this up. All right. And now, let's turn off the highlight control. If you want to see it as a, because sometimes this gray background, which is kind of useful as a way of, as a background for pulling a key and seeing what it is. Sometimes you just want to go into a Hicon mode. And you can come in here and I go into highlight black and white. And now that's a typical kind of Hicon mode that most of you are probably used to seeing. And of course, I also have softness controls on this. So I can blur that out a little bit or a lot. Let's Command H that. And now I want to pull this. I can do this a couple ways. I got a parallel node. And the way the parallel node works, I'm kind of grading through the image. So if I wanted a kind of more of a, let's call it a nuclear sky, I can start pushing this towards the red. And at first, it doesn't really affect the image. The more I go in a direction, the more the parallel node will take my correction and mix it in with the other node. And so it's a bit of, it's kind of an interactive grade. You know, it's not, I'm not pulling a key and the mat's perfectly and it's just, boom, I'm laying it on top. It's more that I'm grading through the base image. That's the way to think of it. Whereas I can come into this parallel node, and I can right-click, and it says Morph into Layer Mixer Node. So I've got another node here that I can create. And by the way, if I wanted to do this originally, if I knew going in I wanted to do a Layer Mixer Node, I could do Add Layer, and it would have added a layer node instead of this parallel node. So let's morph it into that layer node. And now this is actually doing a, hello. I'm resetting. That didn't seem to work. I got to have this node highlighted. It's caught up with me. Now what I can do is I can break this and say, you know what, I want the sky that came off of here, off the hard drive. And in theory, that's what I should be pulling right now. All right, so, and that's a straight key. You know, that's a key. And if I wanted to, if I didn't want quite as much of that, I could come into this little key tab here, and there's a little mix thing, and I can adjust how heavy that key is. It doesn't look like it's doing much right there. Probably because my HSL is all wrong. And if I go to Shift H, nothing's happening. So I've got to reselect this sky. There we go. And now you can see that I've now combined the original sky with this blue grade. And on this layer mixer is a straight key. It's like I'm taking that matte channel and I'm just keying it right on top. And then if I want, now I can come into this key section here. And I can say, okay, give me 50% of that. And I can highlight that. And now I can say, okay, I just want 50% of that. And now I have 50% of that. Okay. So, you know, if you do find you're clipping stuff out, you've gone so far, you've clipped stuff out, this is a different way of retrieving that information. So you're not locked out the moment. It's not like in Apple Color where you can't go back and use in secondary 7 and pull something from secondary 2. It doesn't, you know, you don't have that limitation here. All right. Let's see some other interesting stuff that you might find interesting, especially, okay, Apple Color people, this is for you. They did this for you. Hue versus hue, hue versus saturation, hue versus luma. All right, we've seen this. So in other words, hue versus hue, if I want to, I can just come in here, click on the red. It's added a couple control points already for me. All right, based on what I clicked on. And then you can do your hue rotation. All right, based on the reds. And then you're using this to limit. You know, the more you go further out, you know, the wider colors you're capturing, and these are the colors you're capturing down here. And you can take these and go across from end to end. Hue versus saturation, what's happening here? Well, if I were to come in here and, excuse me, reset this. Hue versus sat, take this red, take this and desaturate it. Now if I go up, I'm saturating the red. If I go down, I'm desaturating the red. Or something like that. All right, that's my hue versus saturation. I pick a color and I can selectively saturate that color or desaturate that color anywhere it is in the window. If I don't have a window mask or window applied to it, it'll happen anywhere it finds that color in the entire image. Hue versus luminance. All right, so I've got that red. The other way of grabbing red, I've got these little palettes here. So if I want to grab red and a little bit of yellow, it just added control points for me. I can grab this intersection, start pulling this down, and then I'm affecting the saturation, the luminance, the brightness of anything that falls in those color values. That's kind of ugly the way that just happened. And then luminance versus saturation. I really like this one. And this one, let's see, let's find another. You know, luminance versus saturation is kind of cool because what I could do is I could just pick the shadows, and I just clicked on here, and it added a control point in the midtone of the shadows. And now I can drop this down, and I'm just desaturating anything that lives in that luminance range. So I use this a lot for shadow desaturation. You know, if my shadows get really contaminated, this sometimes is a very quick way of solving that problem. Different than the HSL, sometimes this is a little smoother than going to the HSL and doing a luminance qualification that way. So just a nice, handy little tool, something that didn't live in color, and I was really happy when I saw this in Resolve 8. And actually, it got me very excited, believe it or not. It's true. You're laughing down there. Blurs. Yeah, so we've got, you know, there are blur controls in here. I can blur stuff up. I can blur stuff up. There we go. There's also sharpening. If you take this, it lives its default. If I do reset all, the default is 50. There it is, 50. And if you go the opposite direction, it becomes sharpening. So it should really be blur sharpen. Because you go the other way, you start getting some heavy sharpening. I got to tell you, you know, clients, you know, soft images, especially on the Canon 5D stuff, you know, they're just a little soft sometimes on some of those shots. And you know, somewhere between, in fact, we twittered about this the other day, a little conversation about that. A lot of us like working in like the 42 to 45 range to give us just enough sharpening to help like get the eyes back, you know, but not so much that you get that edge enhancement. And so I found it works about 85 to 90% of the time when I want to go to it, especially on close-ups and medium shots. Wide shots, that's where you start seeing sometimes, you won't see it here, but if you got a big display as your reference monitor, you'll sometimes start seeing a lot of the high frequency detail. That's what will give away some of the sharpness you're doing. There's also a Pro Mist, it's kind of a Pro Mist thing. This is kind of tricky to use. Let's see if I find another shot that might show me better. When we go to the import that XML, I'll have some shots in there that'll show you better. But the concept is you take the sharpening and you crank it all the way to its maximum. And then you take this scaling and then you crank it all the way up. And it looks terrible there, so then you use the mist mix. And then by mixing this together, what you end up is those edges that you're seeing really accelerated here. You just back those off and you kind of get, it's kind of like glowing around the edges, kind of a pseudo Pro Mist thing. I've used it a couple times, but most of the time I go to it, it doesn't do what I really want it to do. Every now and then it does. So when it does, I mean, it's useful enough that when it works, I'm happy. And when it doesn't, I'm not surprised. So, you know, just keep that in mind.
Do you know if it's possible just to sharpen the luminance channel? Just the luminance channel?
Yes. No. Let me think about this. How would I just sharpen the luminance channel? The answer is no. But I thought I read something. Someone had figured out an answer to this. Let me just give me 1 second to think about it. No. I can ungang the red, green, blue channels, but I don't think there's Y-only sharpening. Yeah, I would like that on the noise reduction. The one thing I haven't looked at, I haven't shown you guys yet, is the noise reduction here. It's not going to work. I don't think it'll work on this computer. There's noise reduction here, so you set the threshold, and as you lift up the threshold, then you take, so this will, more and more of what it sees as the noise, you see it's kind of screwing up on the image there. Yeah, it's saying no, this not going to work with this GPU that's built into this machine. But you can lift up the threshold, which kind of expands how much detail, what it considers to be noise. And then you can apply more and more noise reduction by taking this and going in the opposite direction. I tend not to use it very much. You know, the cool thing about this is and every node can have its own noise reduction. And since every node also has HSL selections, window selections, you know, you can isolate an area of the image and selectively do noise reduction on that. And when it is successful for me, that's how I use it. As just an overall, on this image, apply noise reduction generally looks crappy. But if I use it to really kind of dial in on something, then I have a chance of success. I think they have a little bit of ways to go. Frankly, I'd like to see more control over it is what I'd like to see. It's a little bit more of a hammer. I mean, I've got so many fine tools in here. I've got, you know, different size screwdrivers and all sorts of different tools in here that I can use, and then all of a sudden I'm given a big sledgehammer for noise reduction. And I'd really like something, I'd like a whole toolkit just for noise reduction. One thing I want to show you on here is the still store, because you've seen how I can pull stuff out, and we were working on this shot before. And one of the things I can do is I can double click on this, and now I've got myself, you know, the reference, right? And I can do a horizontal, a vertical split. I can turn this into a cut. I could just, you know, set this here, and then using the view menu is one way of doing this, where I, you know, wipe on and off, Command W, wipe on and off, and now it becomes a cut. I'm in the wipe. I've just taken the wipe, made it full screen, and now it becomes a cut, right? But here's what's interesting. If I right-click on that, and I come down here and select Display Node Graph, not only is it saving out like a DPX, one-frame DPX image of my still store, the image I saved, it's saving with it an associated file that's the actual grade. And I could take this and drag it right in there. And if I undo that, I can take this grade, middle click on it, and I've copied the grade across. Undo that. Undo that. I can not only from the still store copy grades across, I can right click on any thumbnail on the timeline, display its node graph, take that, grab it across. All right. Or I can middle click, and now I've just copied the entire grade across. On top of that, if you're like me and you tend to use your first node to balance your image, right? I don't create my look all in one node. Right? Whatever I'm doing, whether it's vignettes or whatever, technically there's a lot I could do in one node that I don't. I tend to break it up into steps. One reason is if I know that every single grade on my timeline, the first node is always the initial balance. Right? Just trying to get it to kind of where I want it, but not perfectly. What I can do is right click, let me move this. What I can do is right click in the blank area on the stills page, and there's this option here called Preserve Number of Nodes. I'll set this to 1, because usually it's 1 for me. Let's go back. So I've set this to 1. And in this case, it was a black and white. Now I can right click, I can middle click on this, and it's copied across the grade from this still store except the first node. Because I told it to preserve the first node. Because I'm creating, if this was a series of shots, each of them requires a slightly different adjustment to get them to cut together and to get them to balanced. But then the vignette, I want to carry that vignette all the way across. So preserve my first balance node, which is slightly different, but everything else that I use to create my nodes, copy that across. Right? So this is one way that you can balance all your stuff out and then apply your looks and preserve all that. Otherwise, if I would just do straight copy, and then I got to redo that first node. Or I got to sit here and copy them across one by one. Kind of annoying. So if you can train yourself to work that way, this is another huge workflow advancement. You know, I mean, you can get really fast with this. If you train yourself, it takes a little practice. It takes a little while to get used to that. All right. Power grades. Let's take a look at that. So my grades in my project, they exist just with my project. All right. When I start a new project, I start with blank still store. But there's stuff I like to do all the time. And there are little snippets I've saved out. For instance, this vignette here. What if I created this grade, and this vignette I look at and I say, you know what, I'm going to use this all the time. Like just how that is, I want to save that off so that whenever a client comes in, I always have access to that. So what would I do? Well, what I would do is first I'd create a new grade. So create new version. So it's now version 4. And the only point of this version is so I can do this. I can delete node 1. So I only have this little snippet that I want to reuse. Go to my power grade and say, grab still. All right, so now I've grabbed this image, and the only thing in it, if I display the node graph, is this. The thing is, every other job that I load up now, every other job I create, I've got this. In fact, I can export it and save it out. In fact, I've already done that, and I can now come in and import. So I just selected import while right-clicking in the power grade. And I happen to have saved, just on the off chance that I might need it today, I happen to have saved my power grades. And you'll notice as I open this up, I direct your attention to the fact that, you know, vignette outside, DPX, vignette outside, DRX, they're kind of matched together. So the DRX is the data, the DPX is the image. It doesn't matter, you can select one or the other or both. But if I come up here now and just take that, shift, take that, click open. So now I've loaded up a bunch of my power grades. So I can take these on the road with me. What have I got? I've got a sky key here, all right, display node graph. All right, it's pretty much just a luminance key. But you know, the general settings I find work most of the time, and it's usually when I want to do this, just taking that and just dragging it over is oftentimes quicker than going to the HSL and going through all that nonsense, right? Vignette basic, so I've got a couple different vignettes. I got to desat my shadows, right? I've got a high chroma desaturation. I throw it on there. If I've got cars driving through, I've got something that will grab the high chroma parts of the image and then desaturate those, so that for legalization purposes. All right, and blonde fix. For me, I often find that that blondes, their hair oftentimes tends going a little green, so I've got a little hue versus hue curve. If I load that up, you'll see this warms up the hair a little bit in the range that I find blonde hair usually sits, just because I think it looks better. Right? And you can build an entire library. Not only can you save it off and bring it with you, now any other job I do, I have access to it. And that's how I use my power grades. They're snippets. They're little bits of code. I can cut and paste and put wherever I want. How are we doing so far? Questions? No, that's awesome. Keep going, keep going. All right. All right, so I've given you, let's make sure I've covered everything here. One of the things about Windows that's really nifty, and I had this happen the other day. For instance, we're on this grade, and if we, I did the newbie mistake of grading on the first frame of the shot, because if we play this shot down, and you'll see it's managing 10 frames per second, because it's coming off my little Firewire 800 drive, and so it's managing 10 frames a second. Oh, there we go. The GPU, it's now working on the GPU. So the GPU is doing some of this stuff, and then again not. Oh, there we go. So we've got a motorcyclist coming through. And we can see in the beginning that this motorcyclist is getting grabbed by this mask. I'm just going to take this mask anyway and just, whoop. Oh yeah, on this you can selectable softness on the user mask. All right, now let's say I just want to cut a hole for him and not for the rest of this. What node am I on? Okay. So where would we want to do this? So we'd want to do it probably here. So if I turn this off, that's the blue. All right, and what I can do, actually no, here, because that's where we're doing our sky replacement. And what I want to do on the sky replacement is I want to bring this key back up to 100%, just to make it more obvious. Now let's say I wanted to cut a hole in here because I want to keep that blue going in there. So what I can do is come into the window, and I've got a couple choices. Let's try linear. So now I can add a linear. Try linear and turn it on. All right. Now I've got this linear thing here, and I can take it and rotate it. And let's go to Windows, rotate. Let's make sure the right one is active. Rotate aspect, it's not doing it. This happens sometimes on, I find this happens sometimes on that panel and sometimes on the MC color. All right. So I can do this as an add. So the normal way is this is an add. So whatever's happening in the main mask is being added into the secondary mask. I can do this as a holdback mask. So now it's, this is what we're doing in this particular node. If I turn this node off, what we're doing in the node is in the layer mixer here, we're replacing just the sky. All right, but I can do a holdback mask so that it infects some of the sky for some whatever reason I make a choice. All right, I can also do outside, inside. So these masks are kind of interactive. I can only do one grade in this node, but within this node, you can use the interactivity of the masks to help isolate what you want and what you don't want. All right, and yes?
So if you have a shape, is there a way you can use it in another node?
Yes, absolutely. And the most obvious one might be a vignette, where you might want to do one grade on the outside, one grade on the inside. And I'll show that to you in a second. Let's say what I really wanted to do on here is track this motorcycle guy. So I'm going to turn this into a circle. Turn that off. Turn this into a circle. I'm hoping that he's the best. Let's see how this will work. Come on, give me there we go. And let's go a little further up. Come on, where are you? It's my motorcycle guy. Yeah, I'm taxing this processor right now. There we go. All right. So let's say right here. Right here. Let's put this here. So I want him to kind of look normal. While driving through this blue stuff. Well, what I can now do is this blue bounding box in here tells the tracker what it is I want to track. So I'm just, for the purpose of the tracker, I'm going to make him small. And then I'm going to go into my viewer here. I'm going to open up my tracking controls. And now I'm going to track forward. And then you can see in this blue bar, it tells me what's been tracked and what hasn't. So I'll come here and then I'll also track reverse. I might need to make that a little larger. Yeah, no kidding. And then I'll stop it there just so we don't spend all day here. And then if I hit play, all right, so I just tracked out my motorcyclist. Now, if I want to, now I noticed on the back end, the last couple frames, it missed it. So I can come back into the color window and go into my dynamics. And I'm going to start a dynamic, start a keyframe there, undo. If I'm not careful, what I was about to do is, you notice as I direct your attention to down here, where I've got 6 correctors. So each of these can be keyframed independently of each other. Correctors 1 through 5 through 6. And they're all numbered. So corrector 2 here, this number 2 here, relates to 2 there. If I scroll this down, you can see all the elements that are keyframeable. All right, color corrector, qualifiers, 4 different shapes, defocus. All right. Now I was about to add a master keyframe that would have keyframed every single corrector. What I generally recommend you do when you first start a session or the first time you start tracking is you go into, let's see, it is, I always miss this one. It's in a weird spot. Where are you? File, edit, view. It is timeline mode. See, I usually hit a button. There, not auto color. There it is, all color PTZR. So watch what happens on this, this up here when I click this. It's showing me what is going to be affected as I add a dynamic. It's just going to affect that color corrector down here, number 6. If I click it again, it's a toggle. It's like a 3-way toggle. PTZR now gets highlighted. PTZR is for pan, tilt, zoom, rotate. And so that's independently adjustable from everything else. All right. And if I toggle it again, it's now, it's highlighted on this master track. So now it's going to keyframe every single node. I tend to like working with just the node I'm working on. That's what I wanted to highlight. All right. So now I'm going to say start dynamic. And now as we get to the end of this shot, you always do mark, mark, move. So I did my first mark. Right there is where I want it to end. I'll do my second mark. This is just a mark. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this guy bigger. And then I'm going to move him off. And now, as I toggle through here, let's play. All right, so what's just happened is I've tracked, and then I've keyframed the window on top of the track. And every window can be tracked independently of each other, all right, within a node. So that's some keyframing in there for you. Let's check out some of the rest of the rooms we're looking at. The viewer you just kind of saw. All right? This is the tracking room. It's also the stabilizing room. You click this to image stabilize, it becomes a stabilizer. And after it's going to analyze the entire frame, right? It's stabilizing. This is not restricted by windows or HSLs or any of that. This is a stabilizer looking at the entire image. When it's done, you hit stabilization zoom and it gets rid of the blanking. So it'll do the blow up for you. And if you want to smooth it out a little bit, there's a smooth control here. So if you find it's bouncing, if you find that it's a little too steady and you want to add a little bit more motion in it, you can kind of smooth that out a little bit and reduce the amount of stabilization it's doing. There's also some pretty advanced adjustments of the tracker. I mean, you can get in here and you can really, on a frame-by-frame basis, do a lot of keyframing in there. If an obstruction comes through, sometimes you have to kind of go in and manually break the track. And so you'll add a beginning, you'll add an end, and you'll say, kind of clear the rest of the data in between. Don't get confused by that thing that you just saw. The other thing too is, I made this window rather small, simply when I did the track, because I wanted it to track him. If I make it too big, it's going to track the background. It's looking for whatever the majority of what's moving in there, right? It adds a point and averages them all out. And, well, no, it does more than that. It's not quite that simple. So what I can then do is say, all right, let's make this overall larger, and let's increase the softness. And now it holds on to that. The blow up I did at the end of this, it'll still do that blow up on top of it. Yeah, you can see, because I have to change the other side of it now. All right. Some other quick controls here. You can turn on and off an individual node by clicking here. There's a keyboard control to do that up here. There's also arrow up and down to go before and after. You turn it, you go up and it turns everything off, so you're looking at your base. You go down, you're looking at your grade. Dangerous thing about that is if in the middle of this grade we had decided that we didn't like what node number 2 was doing, and then if I hit up arrow and go back down, node number 2 it's like all on and all off. So at some point, you're going to want to clean up your grade. If you've got a couple of these X's going through before you leave your shot, just delete the node. Because if you ever come back to it 3 days later in client review, and you decide to do the up arrow, down arrow thing, and you're not looking there, and then you down arrow again, and all of a sudden the grade looks different than it originally was, what did I have turned off? At which point you go to here and you say original memory. But yeah, happens. So that's the viewer window very briefly. We've got the gallery, so we can manage all of our still stores and power grades. So if I took a show and broke it up into 5 reels, and I decide, as I often do, that in my still store, I want 1 still store per reel, which is what I usually do. So I can just add add still page. So I've got another still page here. And what I usually do is add 1 still page per reel, and then I usually have an exterior still page where I put all my exteriors. And if I need to rearrange them a little bit and maybe copy from one page to another, if I want to use my memories down here, which you can use, it just showed up in my memory down here. So you can, in theory, have one-touch access to your grades. So that's really useful, especially on like scripted dramas, things like that, especially multi-camera shoots. I know a lot of guys like to use it. I tend not to. I just tend to work in the still store. You can do that. The other thing you can do is you can come up here into projects, and you have access to every other user's stills. Let's take a look. Do we have any stills here? Nope. Nope. So I don't know what he's got on here. Yeah, so we've got stills in here. So what I can do is display the node graph there, and I can see what he was doing there. And then if I want to, and if I like that, I can just grab that here, drop it in there. I can't change that. I can't add any stills into here. You have to be loaded into that project. But I can, on my project, take something from another one, drag it in, use it, and then I can now use it on my grades. You can do the same thing with users as well. You can look at a user, and if there was a guest user and he had power grades loaded up, I could grab another user's power grades and pull that up. format, I'm not going to get too much into here. This is another tab. Essentially, you can set masks. I mean, if you know your client's coming in with a, they shot full frame, but maybe they want, a tighter mask, you can grade with a mask applied. And then you decide in your output whether or not you want to burn that mask in. So it'll render it out with the black bars. Because I don't know if you've ever done this where you've color graded stuff that's already been letterboxed, but they render it out with the letterbox and you're grading and then the black bars all start coloring up and it really screws you up. So one way to fix that is you can use, actually if you come up here to the view menu and, not the view menu, session, presets, output blanking. So you can select output blanking on there and just automatically add your own crops and those will always stay black. They won't get affected by your grade. But it's option, and then when you go to do your render, you then have the choice, do I want to keep that in there or not? You can also set your own presets. If you've got some job that's got its own weird masking, you can set that, save it, recall it whenever you want. Deck control, yes, you can go out to a deck. I guess apparently tape is not dead yet. And frame accurate RS42222. If you've got enough horsepower, you can just spit out right from Resolve. No rendering, just, you set it up, set your ins and outs, go. And it'll do a record edit and play it all out real time if you've got the power. If not, I haven't tried this, but I believe it'll do the pre-render and then it'll spit it out.